So everyone, welcome to the first ever live that's titled Meet the Clinician. And the whole point of this is to bring to you guys qualified clinicians in the field who practice every day, just sharing their experience, their skill and their knowledge with you, and just having a space for us to interact together and learn.
So my name's Dami. I am a clinical psychologist. At the moment, I'm working in the NHS. So I work with children and adolescents. So I work with children from about the age of 5 to 18. And I work with children with a range of difficulties. So, children with low mood, children with anxiety, children with autism and ADHD as well. And I don't just work with them, we think together about what's going on for them at home with their family, or thinking a bit about school and how to support them at school with their needs.
Why is this important? Why is it important to talk about mental health in children and adolescents? I know for adults, it might seem like, yeah, that makes sense because they're working, they're functioning, and but it's like children don't get depressed or anxious. So why is it important for us to have these kind of conversations?
And this is the thing, and this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to join this live, because there is this sense that children don't get depressed or don't feel anxious, but actually it's more common than you think. It's really common, and that most children in a classroom, maybe one child in the class would have had some experiences of feeling anxious or low in mood. So it's not to say that children or adolescents don't feel low mood or feel anxious, because they actually do. And the reason why it's important to think about it in childhood is that most adult mental health conditions typically emerge in early adulthood, late adolescence. So people might think, well, that's where we should focus and where we should target. But actually, the building blocks, the foundations start right from birth. You can even argue start from the womb. You can really shape a child's mind, shape their personality right from the womb. So with children, it's not something that we should ignore or neglect, because those building blocks, those foundations are what's going to follow them throughout their lives. So that's why it's really important to be aware of what's going on for your child, not just providing for them physically, which is amazing, definitely, keep them send them to a good school, clothe them, feed them, all that stuff. That's amazing. But the emotional health, the emotional side of things is just as important. And thinking about our child or our children's emotional well-being, teaching them how to sort of regulate their emotions, regulate their feelings, also problem solving, those kinds of things are so important right from the jump. So you can't just kind of at the age of 18 decide that you want to start thinking about your mental health. You need to be thinking about your child's emotional well-being right from the beginning.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I think what just came to my mind is taking care of the whole child. So not just their physical needs, but also their emotional needs. And that starts from, like you said, while they're in the womb, which is, quite important and interesting for us to know. There's a lot of information out there in terms of how mental health difficulties like low mood or anxiety show up in adults. Is that the same for children, or is it different? And in what ways do mental health difficulties show up for children and adolescents that might be different for adults?
Yeah, sure. There's some adult mental health difficulties or disorders that you can think about that only emerge and that you can only really diagnose when a person has, fully become an adult. So things like personality disorder, things like psychosis, those are the things that are more, you can only really start considering those properly when it's an adult. But it's not to say that things like that are quite common, anxiety and low mood, are very common in children and in adolescents. And some things can be very similar they can present in a very similar way with children as they would with adults. And I'll just kind of talk through like the different ages, because it's also about the level and the stage of development for that child. So with younger children, so like with babies, I wouldn't say babies, so with like toddlers and really young children, I think a lot of parents, and I'll use lockdown because it's quite a stressful event that most of us will be able to kind of relate to at the moment. So at the beginning of lockdown, with all the changes, a lot of people were feeling anxious, and it's not just the adults, so children would have been feeling it too. So if children are going through a stressful time, whether that's something awful happening at school, something bad's happening in the family, and they're feeling quite anxious or low in mood, with the younger ones, you might see that in how they are with you. So you might notice a change in their sleep. You might notice a change in their appetite. So it's either that they're eating a lot more than usual, or they're not eating at all. You might also notice a change in their play. So younger children are really good at sort of channeling and processing their thoughts and their feelings through their play. So some people at the beginning of lockdown, because it was a global worry, might have noticed that their child or their children's play was focused around, you know, going to the hospital and dying or sickness. And, you know, those are some of the clues that you can pick up on. And as parents, you know your child better than anyone else. So you can see if there's a change in how they're playing. And it's not to become alarmed or panicked. It's just noticing it and then maybe having a conversation about it. And then with slightly older children, it might be that they might be complaining of a stomach ache, or so if there's a lot of anxiety at school and a child is not having a good time at school, you might find that Friday nights, this child just is full of energy, they're happier, they're doing really well. And then Sunday night, that child just changes, and you can just see that they're not quite themselves. They might say they have a tummy ache, they're just not feeling well. And then Monday morning, the same kind of complaints. And you might start to wonder, is there some anxiety about going back to school? So again, these are some of the things you can pick up on and have a conversation with your child about. And the reason why children would present in this way, which is different to adults, is because they don't have the verbal ability or the ability to recognize their feelings, to say, oh, mummy, I'm feeling sad, or daddy, I'm feeling worried about school, or I'm really worried about coronavirus, or whatever it is. They don't necessarily have the ability to process their feelings and then articulate it. And even some of us adults don't either. So, you know, especially for children, it's quite difficult. So children usually present in a physical way. So if you notice your child is having stomach aches a lot around a specific time, or they're just becoming lethargic, or there's a change. So like I said, it's about knowing your child and knowing their regular routines and patterns. And then if you see a change in that, you know, just being curious and inquisitive about that change. And then, you know, with the adolescents, then you can talk to them, because they will present in very similar ways, because actually depression and anxiety can be quite physical experiences for a lot of us. So if we're feeling quite down, if we're feeling low in mood, then our sleep patterns will change and our eating patterns will change, and we might not enjoy things the way we used to. So if you've got a teenager who used to love going to football or dance after school, and all of a sudden they're not really into that, or they're not really wanting to go and see their friends as much, and they're becoming a bit withdrawn, then you might think, okay, let me have a conversation with my child and see what's going on.
Yeah, I think some of the things I'm picking up from what you're saying is, one, it's quite important as parents to be present in our children's lives.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of what you're talking about is noticing a change. So you can only notice a change if you're present.
Absolutely.
There's something about what you've shared, whereby a lot of this signs that show up for children, the parent has to be the one to initiate that sense of being inquisitive, or in terms of what's going on here, as opposed to maybe relying on our children. If there's something, they'll come and tell me. You've talked a lot about, if you notice this change, notice it, talk to them about it. So something about being present and being kind of comfortable and able to initiate those conversations around emotions, which might not be the norm. I think something that I wanted to ask you as you were talking is, because for younger children that don't have the verbal ability to voice how they're feeling, how as parents do you differentiate between physical symptoms, so like I actually really have a tummy ache,
Yeah.
or when the issues with sleep, and you're kind of, okay, is there something kind of medical going on? How do we differentiate between that and when they're perhaps having more of mental health difficulties? And I guess what I'm also thinking about is that sometimes parents might notice this. They might take the kid to the hospital. Doctor gives them the A-OK, and then say, "Oh, that's fine," and then that's the end of the conversation. So how do we kind of continue that and differentiate between?
And that's such a good question, because a lot of parents will be thinking this, because not every time your child has a stomach ache will you say, okay, we're not going to school today, because that just doesn't work for anyone. But it's about kind of noticing long-term patterns. So let's say my child is never sick, 6 weeks of the school term or half term, my child is in school every day, they're generally happy in school. Then if they come to me with a stomach ache, then I'll think, okay, this is just a stomach bug, let them be off, that kind of thing. But if you're noticing like every Monday and Tuesday, for some reason your child always has a stomach ache every Monday and Tuesday, then you start to think, and like you said, absolutely take your child to the doctor, because you do need to check these things out. So even things like energy levels, so if you've got a teenager who's really like, they just can't be bothered to do anything, they have no motivation, check that their diet is balanced, check that they have enough iron, that kind of thing. But at the same time, you start noticing patterns and think, okay, if Thursday, Friday my child is happier, but Mondays, Tuesdays, there's something going on, then that's kind of how you tease it out. And like I said, really talk to your child and really have that conversation. And I think when I say talk to your child, you might ask a what question, but the most important thing is to listen. So, how are you finding school? Or tell me what's going on at school this week, and just listen to what your child is bringing, because actually in that conversation, your child might bring some of the things that you're already curious and wondering about, but only your child can sort of communicate that with you. Don't jump in and say, oh, is someone bullying you? Are you worried? That kind of thing. It's kind of listening and just letting them talk and feel that silence.
And it's interesting you say that, because most times when you give kids that space to talk, they will fill that space up, and they will tell you what is going on. Something else that is quite common, and you hear a number of parents talk about, is bullying. And when their children are going through bullying in schools, and sometimes that can be a source of what then brings on mental health difficulties, especially if the child is struggling with that and not really knowing how to deal with that in schools. What are your thoughts around bullying in schools, and how do we support children and adolescents that are going through that?
I think bullying is just I feel like it's such a common thing, but it's also such a demoralizing thing for children. It's really, really horrible. And, you do hear some horror stories about things that children have experienced and things that children have gone through. So I think the first step is actually, I want to just kind of outline the different types of bullying, because I think maybe traditionally the old school bullying was kind of like, oh, this kid keeps pushing you down in the playground, or this kid is like punching you, or like in the American cartoons, they're like dunking your head in the toilet or giving you a wedgie, that kind of thing. And I think it's a lot deeper than that, because that's the very obvious, that's the overt kind of physical bullying. But then in this day and age that we live in, there's the emotional bullying, and children can just call each other names and say really nasty things to that child, which also counts as bullying. That's the emotional side. And then now, with all these social media platforms, we've got cyberbullying as well. So, it's a complete minefield for a lot of parents, and it's so broad. And for these children, it's almost like every angle they can potentially, encounter bullying. So I think the first step is to first recognize that there are different types of bullying, and to identify what they are. I think then the next steps is to watch out for signs that maybe your child is being bullied, because children may not always come out and say that they're being bullied. Children may not even recognize that they're being bullied, because you know, social relationships are so complex most of the times, and children, and like I said, it's evolving and changing. So children might think, oh, this is my friend, but it's a really unhealthy relationship where this child is calling you names, but then you're kind of my friend. So first of all, your child might not recognize that they are being bullied. So for you as a parent, for us as, you know, adults, to recognize some of those so signs. So it could be things like a child who was really bubbly and confident, almost now becoming really subdued and withdrawn and losing their confidence in things. That's, you know, that's a sign. It could be things like anxiety with going to school. So like I mentioned before, you know, they can be really happy on the weekends, and then Sunday night, Monday morning, they're really anxious about returning to school and say, oh, mummy, can I stay home with you? Daddy, can we not go to school today? So it's really important to kind of notice these things if your child is no longer enjoying school. So if it was a child that was enjoying school before, now they're not wanting to go, and you know, checking up with them, what's going on. And then again, the telltale signs: change in appetite, change in sleep. These are also things that, you know, can be signs that they could be bullying. And then you have that conversation with your child and be really clear with your child about what's going on. So if your child can write, get them to write it down and to explain how they feel, what's going on, so that you are clear. And then absolutely, as a parent, you take the steps to deal with that. So it could be going into the school and reporting it. And I think it's absolutely important to report it to the teacher, because sometimes and I know back in the days, what you might have done is go to the child's parents and then, you know, have that conversation. And I'm not saying necessarily don't do that, but I think the best and most appropriate step is to go to the teacher and to the school, because it could be a wider issue with the school. And then, you know, if the schools aren't doing anything about it, then you can step it up. So, you know, if you're in the UK, you've got like safeguarding leads. If it's in Nigeria, again, you can think about the head teacher and things like that. And then if that's
like the principal,
exactly, yeah. And then if that's still not working, then the police, you know, absolutely, if it's the police. And especially if it's cyberbullying and these children, you know, have posted something that's illegal, then absolutely call the police and let the police deal with it. So those are the sort of practical steps that you can take, because I think sometimes as a parent, if you hear your child is being bullied, the first thing you want to do is kind of, you know, and absolutely with righteous anger, you want to deal with that person that's, you know, bullying your child. But I think taking the appropriate and the correct steps is the first, you know, is really important to do. And then with your child, is really giving them that space to express how they are feeling and to express what's going on and what thoughts they have. Because I think we can be really quick to jump in and to reassure and to soothe our child, to say, oh no, don't mind that person, they're just silly, that kind of thing. But before you do that, and I'm not saying not to reassure your child, it's kind of checking out with them what hurts them about the bullying, because we might assume it's because they said this, but then actually it's a completely different thing that is bothering your child. So really check out with them what's going on. And there's something about sort of just giving your child that permission to talk to you about things.
Something I was going to ask you, Dami, or comment on as you were talking, is also around school performance. So a lot of times when there's bullying or our child is going through a difficult time, one thing that might be, especially for us Nigerian parents, that might be like the first thing we notice is that they start performing poorly in school.
Absolutely.
And usually, and I know I'm talking from my experience, which was almost like 25 years ago. So I'm sure things have changed. And if they have, please feel free to comment. But usually I observe that the go-to often is to just kind of see that as, oh, the child isn't working hard enough or isn't studying hard enough and they need to do better. And we never really go underneath that to see, is there a bit more going on? Outside of just studying and working and doing their homework. I don't know if you want to comment on that a bit.
And that is so spot on, because I think especially if you're paying school fees and your child is not performing and you're thinking, what's going on? I think that is such an anxiety provoking thing for parents as well. But then so to put yourself in the position of that child, the way or the reason why you might see that is, if you're anxious or worried about survival. So, bullying, it does is a threat to that child's either physical well-being or their emotional well-being. So if they're in a school or in an environment where they're literally in survival mode, where you're either in fight or flight mode, you can't sort of be in a relaxed state of mind to receive learning in the way that you would if you were happy and you were calm. And an example that one of my colleagues and someone we studied with always says is that, have you ever tried to do complex maths while running on a treadmill? And you can't do it. So if anyone ever goes to the gym and they try to do it, you just can't. So if you're running, physically running, your focus for your body is to keep yourself upright and to not fall, and to make sure that your heart is pumping, that your lungs are getting oxygen to your blood, and that's what your body will prioritize. So you can't be using your brain to do complex mental maths. And it's the same if a child is feeling threatened in school, in that child is just focusing on surviving. So they're being hypervigilant for, is someone looking at me? Is someone coming to hurt me? Is someone going to say something nasty to me? So their focus is on all those things to keep them safe. So they can't relax and they can't focus on schoolwork and academic work. So yeah, absolutely. I think you're so spot on with that observation. And for parents, that might be a red flag as well.
Is there a place for empowering children? Because I know you've talked from the angle of what the parent can do to support their children when they're being bullied. Is there a place? I know that bullying can be quite a complicated issue, and it does require like intervening from different angles, so from the parent and the school. Is there a place in bullying to empower children that are being bullied to help themselves, in addition to the other ways of intervening that you've mentioned already?
Yeah. And I think, what I mentioned at the beginning about sort of laying the foundations, it's really important that we help to foster a sense, a good sense of self in our children, so that idea of boosting their confidence and boosting their resilience from little. So, really praising your child and really complimenting your child so that from home they have that sense of identity. So, you're so clever, you're so brilliant, any little thing they do at home, just really praising them for that, because that becomes their internal monologue. So they know they have those words in their minds, so that even if they go out and someone says something contrary, actually at home, I'm loved, I'm well respected, my opinion matters. I think, at home we can kind of assume that our children are supposed to be well behaved. So then we just kind of just let them do what they're supposed to do and not comment on it, but actually really praising them for doing a good job at sweeping the floor, or really valuing their opinion. So if you're sitting around the dinner table and you're having a conversation as a family, really sit and listen to your child's thoughts and opinions, because it shows them that their thoughts and their opinions are valued. And if from home they have that sense of self and identity and value, then that's a way of kind of building that in. And I think, in this day and age where there is a lot of talk about sort of being Black and the racism that exists in this world, I think, thank God for these conversations that are happening now, because there's so many books, diverse books, where children can see themselves in literature and they can see themselves on TV. And that, you might think, oh, that's quite trivial, but actually it's really not. So if you can see yourself as a superhero, a Black superhero, if you can see yourself as a doctor, if you can see yourself as a lawyer, these are the things that are going to boost your confidence as a young person. And like I said, it's not to say that when people say negative things to you, it's not is going to completely wash off, but the idea is that they'll have competing voices, because
Yeah.
if the only voice they have is a negative one, then that's the one they're going to believe. But at least if from home, in their community, whether, you know, it's in your family, their friends, there are positive voices and positive words and affirmations, then when they hear a negative one, you can almost imagine it as like it's a thin story. These are some of the terms we use at work. So, you know, that's a thin story compared to the thick story and the detailed story of you being this clever, bright, confident, beautiful, strong person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. As you were saying that, what came to my mind was this idea that the perceptions that we hold of ourselves, even as adults, is influenced a lot by our kind of how we were treated by our significant others. So how we view ourselves and how we think others view us is in part influenced by how, you know, our relationships were with our significant others. So that does make a lot of sense. And I like what you were talking about there in terms of the thin and the thick story. And hopefully when we go into age appropriate ways to support children who are dealing with difficulties, you can expand on that. Yeah. So our last question, for like that I've planned, and then if there are any more, we'll take it, is what are some age appropriate ways to support children? So if from everything you've talked about today, so if you're noticing the signs, the physical signs for much younger children, and then even as they go older, they're a bit more vocal, and they're sharing with you that they're feeling low or they're feeling anxious, what are age appropriate ways of supporting children with that?
And I think, so there's, just to say, there's such a broad range in terms of what your child needs. So the first step I would say is first recognizing what that child needs. And your child might not know, and your child might think that they need something else, and then it's going to evolve. So it's constant communication and dialogue with your child, and thinking through with them and problem solving with them as well about what do they need. So that's the first step I would say. And I also think noticing patterns. So you can either do this by yourself if it's a younger child, or if it's an older child who comes to you to say, I really don't like school because I'm really worried about this happening, or whatever it is maybe noticing patterns. And I always do this in my work with clients. I usually get everybody to do a diary, because it just gets it really fresh in your mind. Because I think if I'm coming to you today and I'm feeling sad, and you ask me how's my week, I'm just going to remember all the sad things that happened last week. Whereas if I come to you today and I'm happy, and you say how was your week, I'm going to remember all the happy things. So the first thing is getting a diary and just jotting things down. So either you do it on behalf of your child if they're too young, but if they're old enough, then they can do one. And I always say kids always lose paper, I lose paper. So if you have like notes in your phone, just put it in your notes in your phone, so that you've got it to your hand. And it will just be things like, you can have the days of the week and the different times. So if the child is complaining about anxiety, for example, then you can just jot down was crying, or was shaking, or was saying they had a tummy ache, and then you put the date and the time. And then if you review it after a week or two, what you might start to see is a pattern. So what you might see is that for some reason, Mondays at 6 o'clock is when your child has a stomach ache, or Friday at 4 p.m. your child has a stomach ache. And then you notice, oh, Friday at 6 is when my child is going to drama school. And then you might start thinking, okay, what's happening at drama school that my child doesn't like, or that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to say is the first step is establishing a pattern and seeing what's going on for your child. And whether it's a younger child or an older child, you either do that or you do that with the child, so that you can start to notice things. Or if it's an older child and they're having really negative thoughts about things like, I'm no good, I'm not good enough, again, these are some of the things that you can put down in a diary. And then the next step is just thinking with that child about problem solving. So what is the problem? So again, if it's a younger child, you're probably going to do the majority of this work. If it's an older child, then you're going to think with them. And I always say, ask the child and see what they come up with, because kids are geniuses. They come up with solutions better than we can at times. So, you know, an example I'll give is a child who is starting secondary school for the first time is worried about getting lost on the way to school. That's just an example. So you ask the child, okay, so what do you think will help? And then the child might come up with something like, you drive me to school every day. And then you think, well, that's not going to happen because you need to go by yourself. But let them generate as many solutions, go through the solutions together. And then you pick maybe the top 2, the top 3, and then you work through it together. So those are some of the ways that you can do it. But and that's how you can do it by yourself. If there are things that need to happen that you think, okay, we can't deal with this, we can't handle this, you know, then it could be thinking about maybe speaking to your GP if you're in the UK, because GPs have access to resources around, so they can put you in contact with a counsellor, with a psychologist like you and me, to think through with the psychologist. And, you know, if you go and see a psychologist about things, you don't need to worry about, oh, does this mean there's something really wrong with my child? Actually, the earlier you get in and sort of support your child, then it won't develop and become a mountain that's too difficult to climb. I think if you're in Nigeria, there are reputable sites and clinicians that you can contact, and they can support you and your family with problem solving. So I'll stop there because I'm just thinking about the time. But, you know, there's such a broad range of ways that you can do it. But the first step is to listen to your child and to establish patterns, because you will start to notice that there are things that are happening at specific times. Or if you find that it's all the time, then again, that's another thing that's helpful to understand.
Yeah, I quite like that, because I think all of us, I'm also guilty about it, is when we identify a problem, we all want to just kind of jump in straight ahead to solve it. And I think what you're sharing here that is really important is taking a step back and really observing what is it that's going on here? What is the problem? Because by identifying the problem, you're identifying the need. And through that process as well, you're beginning to teach your child the act of problem solving and what that actually looks like practically. So I really like that. And as you were talking as well, something that I was thinking about was how you've shared the different ways that kids express their emotions or when they're having a difficult time, and how those ways as well can be really good tools in terms of supporting children with regulating their emotions or sharing their thoughts and their feelings. So for example, with play, if children you know, play to express themselves, play can also be used as a way to teach children how to regulate their emotions. Exactly. Same thing with writing. I'm curious to hear what you think about social stories, and I want to share a story here because I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and one of them was feeling quite anxious in school because she wanted to do really well, and she was so young. And so I remember when she reached out to me and she was like, I'm feeling anxious, Auntie Bibi. You could call me Auntie Bibi. And I was cracking my head because I don't work with children and adolescents normally. So I was like, how do you support a 5-year-old child who's feeling anxious? And one of the things that we did together was a story. So kind of making up a story together of Mr. Bean, who's anxious and going to school, and then kind of coming up with that story with her of what Mr. Bean can do when he's anxious. He can take a deep breath. He can go talk to his teacher and tell his teacher that he needs a bit of help, or he can play with his friends at break time. And there's something about using the same tools that children use to express themselves as a way as well to teach them ways to regulate their emotions. I don't know if you want to comment about that at all.
That's such a lovely example, and that is it. It's taking the interest of the child and the words of the child as well, and problem solving it. And this is what happens a lot of the time. You know what I mentioned before about being in survival mode? When a child is feeling anxious in school, they can't really think, okay, what are the options that I can take and what can I do to help myself? And that is just absolutely spot on in creating a social story. When I feel anxious, I can do this or I can do that, and just really bringing it to life, and also having it written down as well is just perfect, because if they can't think about it, they have it either written down or stuck on their table. And it's just such a beautiful example that you use there, because yeah, you would think, oh my goodness, a 5-year-old being anxious, and you think, where's that coming from? And then we can get into our heads about, oh, why is this happening? But what was really, I think, beautiful that you did is you validated her feelings, because as adults, sometimes you can think, oh, what have you got to be worried about? But really validating their feelings and accepting that, yes, I can't understand why you would feel this way, but this is how you feel. How can we support you? And that's, yeah, that's so beautiful. And, you know, taking their interest. So whether it's Mr. Bean, or if they're into power, I was just about to say Powerpuff Girls. I don't think that children like Powerpuff Girls. That's my generation. Whatever their interests are, you know, really using that and bringing it to life, because that is what is going to stick for them. You know, I've heard stories of parents saying that their children wouldn't do something before, but then if they said their favorite cartoon character liked doing it, then that child wanted to do it. So, you know, Mr. Bean likes eating broccoli, so then now the child eats broccoli all the time, that kind of thing. It's a really good way to engage them.
Yes, yes, I completely agree. That's a really nice one, because you're right. Kids and their favorite like cartoon character, it's a really lovely way to get them to engage in things, and also to remember things.
Yes,
because,
exactly.
Children learn a lot around bravery and courage from their superheroes,
yes,
and what they do, and so I think that's a really lovely way as well. How do you deal with a child that's 10 and won't talk to their mom? They're just comfortable with their siblings.
That's a really tough one, because, you know, as a parent, I can almost think, oh, I wish my child would just tell me everything, and you know, they would feel completely comfortable talking to me, and I can completely empathize with that parent, with feeling really frustrated, or maybe feeling like, what's going on? Why won't you tell me anything? And it's kind of drawing that balance between wanting your child to tell you everything, and then actually thinking, what does this child need, and why won't they talk to me? So it could be that they feel like the thing that they want to talk to you about might get them in trouble, because that's a very common thought for children. They might think this thought is too dangerous, this thought is too naughty, this thought or feeling is too bad, and I don't want my parents to see me that way. So it's about maybe opening up or creating a space where your child feels safe enough to do that. And one of the ways you can help your child to feel safe enough to do that is by practicing what you preach. So do you at home talk about your feelings routinely? So if you're walking around, you know, you come home from work and your kids say, oh, hi mummy, how are you? And then you just say fine all the time, then your child is going to learn that actually mummy's always fine. But if you say, oh, I've had a really tough day at work today and I'm just a bit tired actually, or oh, I'm really anxious today because I have a meeting or I have a job interview later. So creating that example at home, that narrative that it's okay to talk about feelings, and we can talk about feelings, and we can talk about not just good feelings, but we can also talk about difficult ones as well. So I think that's one of the first ways that we as parents, right from the jump, so you know, if you've got a toddler at home, really talking about feelings all the time is, oh, you look a bit upset, or are you a bit frustrated? So that there's that language within the home of talking about feelings and a range of feelings, because the way I see it, there aren't any good emotions or bad emotions. Emotions are just emotions. It's just kind of, we as a culture, as a society, have kind of evolved into thinking, okay, these ones are okay to talk about and these ones are not so okay to talk about. So that's the first thing, kind of having a culture of talking. And then I think a second thing could be maybe commenting to your 10-year-old to say, oh, I noticed that, you know, maybe you don't seem that comfortable with talking to me about certain things. What are you worried about? And finding out what those worries are, or what the barriers are from your child. Again, they might not want to tell you what those barriers are. And that's okay. I think, you know, especially with a 10-year-old, they're kind of moving towards adolescence, and they're moving from that sense of completely depending on their mom and dad for everything. And then it's period of individuation where actually they're becoming their own person, and they might not need you in the way that they needed you as a child. So it's kind of letting your child know that I completely respect your need for privacy, and actually that relationship with your siblings is a beautiful one. Like, I have 3 sisters of my own, and you know, we share a lot. So it's kind of respecting that and saying, if there's anything that's too big for you and your siblings to handle, I'm here for you. So come and let me know. So it's kind of letting your child know that it's okay, but if it's getting too big, please come and talk to me. And then the alternative things like writing and drawing that some children just prefer. So whether they want to write a letter and then post it to their parents so the parent can read it, and then you can maybe agree a time and a day for when you have that conversation. So there's just a range of things, and maybe talking might feel too big, but so writing it down might feel a lot more manageable for your child.
Yeah, I think those are really, really helpful tips. So modeling what you want from your child. And I really like that because as you said before, younger children don't have the verbal ability to voice what they're feeling. And sometimes just naming that helps them to start pairing that up. Like, oh, that's anxiety that I'm feeling. And also it creates a culture where it's okay to talk about emotions. And as I'm saying that, what that makes me think about, you know, especially like working in adult mental health, some of the times the blockers or the barriers that you find in therapy, when you try to explore that further with patients and clients, sometimes they talk about it's just not the culture in my family. We just don't talk about how we feel. That's just not what we do. And so it's interesting how the culture at home, how they watch significant others relate to one another, and how significant others relate to them impacts, you know, where they stand when it comes to things around talking about their feelings, regulating their feelings. So that was interesting what you said there. And then talking about talking, and I love that, and I think I also recognize that that's a very it's a very natural thing to psychologists, but for most people in just the general population, it's like a weird thing. It's like, why would I talk about talking? I'm just going to talk. But I love what you said there about sometimes just talking about talking, it feels less defensive. And so kids can just like say, even though they don't want to tell you what it is, they can at least tell you what's getting in the way of why they're not talking about that thing. And sometimes having that knowledge can help with problem solving.
Is that kind of zooming out, isn't it? It's kind of so you're just focused on the problem and what it is, but actually let's zoom out a little and just think, what's going to help you talk to me? What gets in the way, and that kind of thing. And I think, you know, the comment there about his personality, there's also something about personality. If someone is introverted, talking might just feel too much for them. So giving them an out so that they're not necessarily talking to you, but writing it down in a way that feels comfortable, drawing it, you know, not everyone talks as much as I do, and I completely get that, and it's fine. So it's thinking about what works for you in terms of your personality.
Yes. And I think as you were talking, especially when you started mentioning age, so, you know, as kids get older, there's they go through this process of wanting to become their own person. And one of the ways that they show that is they start kind of distancing a bit from parents, where they're not always depending on their parents as much. And I was just thinking as you were talking, you know, what's the place of anxiety from the parents being projected onto the children? Because a lot of times, you know, for the parents, it's like, oh, well, they've stopped talking to me. What does this mean? Is anything going on? Why are they talking to the siblings? Or, for example, with that idea of an introverted child, if that doesn't fit what the parents' idea of what their child should be like, or if they're different from the other siblings who are more extroverts, then it might be a thing of, okay, there's something wrong. What is it with this child? Why are they different? So can you talk a bit about how sometimes, you know, what's happening for the child? It's not that there's anything going on with the child.
Not at all.
The anxiety of the parents being projected onto the child.
And I think this, you know, we need to think about culture and generations when we're thinking about this as well. So, like, you know, if you're living in England or the UK, but actually if just the generation that we have now, there is this bigger sense of finding who you are and finding yourself, and it's happening a lot younger. I think, you know, for generations past, it might have been, you know, you go to university, you leave the house, and then you need to figure out who you are. But like kids these days are on TikTok having their own personality, so there's nothing wrong with that. You know, all of us at some point need to find our own individual sense, and I think there's something about generations maybe finding that earlier, but that's absolutely normative. It's part of everybody's life. And I think also with Nigerian culture as well, there is this sense of, I want to be a good child. So disclaimer, I'm Nigerian. My surname is Ghanaian, but I'm Nigerian. And I know there is this sense of, you know, you need to make your parents and your family proud. And there is that sense of being a collective. So feeling individual might feel a bit uncomfortable for some people. It might feel uncomfortable for the parents, it might feel uncomfortable for the young person, but it's a process and it's a journey, and you know, it's something that we all navigate and negotiate as we're growing up and developing. And actually, that sense of individuation, you need that, because it's a way that you become an adult, and you learn to problem solve, and you learn to deal with life, because nobody wants their 30-year-old still asking them, how do you make pasta or rice or anything like that. So that sense of the child becoming more individual and wanting to do things by themselves is part of them growing and developing and learning to problem solve and learning to regulate their feelings for themselves and learning, how do I form friendships and relationships with people that aren't my family? So it's part of life, and it's part of growth and development.
Yeah. I think that idea of different ways of expression is quite an important one. So because talking is one of our main ways of communicating, that's often the one that people are like, yeah, this is what we need to focus on. But like you've said a number of times already on this call, is that expression can happen in a lot of different ways. It can be through play, it can be through writing, it can be through drawing. Just adding on to that, it could be through singing, and all these are also different ways of expression. And it's about finding what works for that child in terms of how they are able to express themselves, because all children are different, even if you have more than one.
Exactly. You know, same parents, like same two parents, same household, same everything, and you will just get completely different children. So it's about rolling with your child. Each child is so unique, and that is the beauty of it. So if one of your children wants to break dance as their way of expressing themselves, then you kind of need to let them. If another one just likes to sit and read books or write books, then again, it's just rolling with the gifts and the personality that each child has been given. And and as a parent, you have to adapt. You're the one that has to do the adaptation, because you have 4 different children, or 3 or 2 different children to raise. So that's part of it.
How do you deal with a child whose attention span is short?
I love this question. I don't know how old this child is, but short attention spans with children is so common. My attention span is short, and I'm an adult. So it's really about giving them a goal and really breaking down time for them. So if you say to a child, give me a minute, they can't quite figure out, or they can't quite get a sense of what a minute is. So being really specific. So if your child can tell the time, then you can say, when it's 3 o'clock, we'll do this. Or you can say, when the long hand is on 6, then you will change the activity. So it's about using timers and time to show the child. So you can get little timers, you know, sand timers, and you can get like 3-minute ones, 5-minute ones, and say, right, I want you to do your homework for 3 minutes, and then you set the timer. Then the child does the work, and then you praise them for doing, you're so good, I'm so proud of you, that was really good, you concentrated for 3 whole minutes. Right, can you do another 3 minutes? Set the timer again. And then what you'll realize is that your child's tolerance and attention will build. So lots of praise as you're doing it. And then once, let's say you've done half an hour, so you've done 3-minute timers 10 times. At the end of half an hour, give them a treat. So it doesn't have to be expensive. If your child likes fan ice, get them a fan ice. If they like chin chin, get them whatever it is, just a reward for trying, because it is, you know, I don't know the age of this child, but attention 7, okay, 7, yeah. So paying attention for a 7-year-old can be tough. As an adult, you might think, is only 20 minutes, but actually 20 minutes can feel like a lifetime for some children. So break it into smaller chunks and say, right, we're going to write the introduction for 5 minutes, do 5 minutes, praise them, right? Even if you want to get them to stand up and do like a star jump so that they're moving their muscles and they've got the wriggles. I always say the wriggles out. You shake out the wriggles and then sit back down. Let's do another 5 minutes. And then, so it's just about building it up. So you start with small chunks, and then you gradually increase it as the child's tolerance builds up.
I like that a lot, because then there's always an end point. So the child is always looking forward to, okay, this is going to be till 3.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't have to do this forever. I don't have to.
Yes.
I don't know when this is going to end, and a lot of reinforcement and praise.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do to help with terrible twos, or is that invisible?
The grace of God for terrible twos. I think, you know, it's a tough time for every parent. There's no parent I've ever met that has a 2-year-old that's just like, oh, this is a walk in the park. I think it's really tough. But I think with 2-year-olds, the most important thing is prevention. So if your child, for example, always wants to eat biscuit, don't let the child see biscuit. Hide the biscuits in the cupboards at the top where the child can't have access to it. So the way I see it is, and I'm assuming that the terrible twos, the issue there is the tantrums. So if we think about the tantrums as the behavior, so that's the B, you need to think about what happens before the behavior and what happens after. So before the behavior is things that you can prevent. So if it's things that this child cannot resist, remove it. If you know your child cannot walk calmly in Tesco's or Sainsbury's, don't take them shopping with you. If you know your child you know, is going to play loudly with something in church, then don't take that loud toy to church with you. So it's about prevention is the first step, and then you need to think at the end so if you can do that, then that's really great. But there's some things you can't avoid. So it's things like, what does my child get from this? So when they're having a tantrum, am I standing there saying, oh, please, 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 I'll give you sweet, I'll give you biscuit, I'll give you this? Because what that's actually doing is making the child more likely to repeat that behavior.
You're reinforcing that behavior.
Yeah. So the best thing is to try as much as possible, and if it's safe, to ignore the behavior and the tantrum. So if your child is screaming the house down, just, you know, turn your head and don't engage in it, because any attention is a reward for children who are having tantrums.
Even bad attention.
Exactly. So if you can, just turn your head and be quiet. And if you have another child in the vicinity that's behaving themselves, give that child all the attention and praise. And soon as your child who's having a tantrum starts behaving themselves, jump in with all the praise.
Yeah. How do you deal with an 8-year-old who is very strong-willed?
Being strong-willed is a good thing. That child is probably going to be a leader when they grow up. So you need to find out what they're being strong-willed about. And I would just say, pick your battles. So there's some things that are deal breakers. If it's going to put anyone at risk or anyone at harm, then, you know, definitely the child can't have that. But if that child is, you know, if it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, then just ignore it. But then I think forced choice. So instead of saying, no, you can't have this, you say to the child, right, you can have cereal. You can either have Cocoa Pops or Rice Krispies. So they're getting a choice, and they can express their strong-willed with a choice, but it's a limited choice. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Dan, for coming and sharing your words of wisdom,
experience, it was my pleasure,
with us. We loved having you, and hopefully you come back and talk to us again about ASD and
anytime.
ADHD.
Anytime.
Thanks, and everyone for joining. Thank you for joining. We're going to end the call now because we have 4 seconds left. Bye.
See you later.